Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, a channel all about learning a language through the act of reading. So today I wanted to do a video all about the method that I'm using, the reading method that I'm using, and the differences between that and some of the other things that you can do. There's really two schools of thought when it comes to reading in your foreign language, and I just kind of want to talk about what I specifically am doing, because these schools of thought are not necessarily conflicting with each other. It's just that the people who believe one way are really very heavily against doing it the other way for one reason or another. So the two schools of thought when reading in a foreign language are intensive reading versus extensive reading. Now, what these two things are is intensive reading is a very intensive look into the story. You are reading a story and you are looking up every word that you don't know. Mostly every word that you don't know. So maybe sometimes you choose not to look one up if it doesn't seem as important. But for the most part, you are looking up practically everything that you don't know or that you don't understand. Now on the other side of this, you have extensive reading, where extensive reading, you aren't looking up the words that you don't know. Generally, you are just reading. And you are even then most likely rereading. You're rereading chapters, you're rereading articles, and things like that, so that you can start to pick up what you didn't pick up the first time. Now, I have my problems with both of these, which is why I do this the way that I do it, which I will talk about towards the end. Now, with intensive reading, the problem with that is that it can feel very overwhelming, and it can feel very boring, because when you are going to read a story, so if I were to take one of these books off my shelf, let's just say I grab Harry Potter y la Piedra Filosofal, and I was to just start reading this and look up every word that I don't know. So let's see. El niño que vivió, el señor y la señora que vivían, el número 4. So there's already in the first sentence, número 4 de private drive estaban orgullosos. There's already a word in the very first sentence that I don't know. So I'm going to stop and look up that word. And then, there's word number 2. It's also in the first sentence. Okay, so then second sentence, there's a word that I don't know. There's a word that I don't know. So that's 4 words. So already in this first paragraph, there are 7 words that I don't know just in the first paragraph. And then I'm going to have to go through this entire book doing that same thing and looking those up. Now, when you do this, once you get through the first, and I know, who was it? Now, I watched a video from Robin McPherson where he talked about reading, and that's one of the things that he does, is he will do that intensive reading of a chapter after he's read it. And then he says once he gets through those first couple of chapters, those first 2, 3, 4 chapters, he's found that then all of a sudden he doesn't really need to look up anything anymore, because in those first few chapters, he now has the vocabulary that he needs to read the entire rest of the novel without really looking anything up. And that's kind of a point I want to get to, but the problem that I have with that is that if you are doing that, you're just going right off the bat, right into that, okay, look up this word, look up this word, look up this word, look up this word, or phrase, or whatever you're doing, is that gets very boring and demotivating very quickly for a lot of people. Now, some people can do that and be very motivated by that. Robin McPherson actually said that makes him feel like a detective, like he's trying to figure out the story at the same time the author is, because he's trying to figure out these words and where they fit and why they work and different things like that. It makes him feel like a detective. And when I kind of started doing it, I did kind of get that feeling a little bit. But mostly it felt like a lot of work. Probably didn't help that I was doing it while I was on break at work, and so I didn't really have a whole lot of time, and I could only do a couple sentences at a time and things like that. And so I might give that another shot, just doing that plainly right off the bat. But I may not, because I do it a little differently. Now, extensive reading, on the other hand, So this is where you are just reading straight through a novel, and you're generally going chapter by chapter. This is what Ollie Richards recommends, and this is what Stephen Krashen has talked about. Is that you are reading, like I say in Ollie Richards' case, you're reading a chapter, and then you're going back and reading that chapter again, and with audio if it's available, because that is super helpful, and it's super helpful. Once you've read that chapter another time, or maybe a third time, or a fourth time, or a fifth time, or however many times you want to read through it, once you get to that, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth, ninth time reading through the chapter, some of those words that you didn't know are starting to make sense at that point, because of the words that you already knew to begin with, maybe, if you've done a little bit of studying already, or with the cognates that are available, like hospital and hospital, or something like that, your brain will start to make those connections. Now, the problem that I have with just straight extensive reading is that it relies very heavily on comprehensible input, which means that what you are reading needs to be comprehensible to an extent. Generally, the number thrown around is that whatever you're reading, you need to be able to understand at least I believe it's 95%, it might be 97%, something around there. It's in the 90s. So you need to understand 97% of that novel. The problem that I have with this is that means that you can't use this method really as a way of learning a language. You can use it as a supplement to something else to learn a language, but you then really can't use it in that way to learn a language the way that I am. And that was the problem that I had. And what I discovered is that when I was first starting to test this method out, before I started recording videos and started the story learning method, I had Ollie Richards' book of short stories in Spanish. And what I was doing is I read the first chapter of the first story to see how much of it I would be able to understand. And I found that I could actually understand quite a bit of that. And so that was actually a lot of fun for me. But that understanding quite a bit of that means that I was understanding probably about 50%, somewhere around there. And that goes against what the extensive reading idea and philosophy kind of is. And I just feel like I actually got a lot more out of it, only understanding 50% right off the bat, than I would have if I had understood 97% of that story. I feel like I got more of it than I would have. So that's one of the reasons that I don't go just straight extensive reading. And it does work for some people, and it's a good way to kind of pick a novel. So if you pick up a book in your target language in your Barnes and Noble store, your used bookstore, wherever you're finding this book, if you then look at the first, even just the first paragraph, not even the first page, the first paragraph, and you read through that paragraph, and you're only able to understand 2 out of every 10 words, then maybe pick something a little bit easier. That's the only time that I would draw a line and that's just kind of the way that I do it. But I don't think it's necessary to already be able to understand 97% of what you're reading, because then, to me, you're not really getting as much out of it as you could. That to me would mean that you already understand enough of the language that is being used to read something more complicated. And it could come because I've been a reader for so long, and so I have such a wide vocabulary base in English, being my native language. But I don't know for sure where it comes from. I mean, I'm also a writer, and so I know random vocabulary that some people don't know because they don't use, whereas I use it when I'm writing my random stories and whatever that I do. But I'm not entirely sure. So, last thing, what is it exactly that I'm doing? I am doing neither intensive reading nor extensive reading. What I'm doing is some weird hybrid conglomeration of the two that I have yet to find somebody that has a name for it. I don't have a name for it. I just say I'm doing a hybrid of extensive and intensive reading. So what does this mean? This means that when I first start out, so reading James y el Melocotón Gigante, for example, which is the one that I'm working on or that I'm reading right now. as I'm reading this, what I did is I read through the first chapter. I didn't look anything up. I didn't even have my phone open. I didn't have a dictionary. I don't even think I have a Spanish dictionary, actually, come to think of it, which is weird. But I didn't look anything up. I read through it. It's short chapters, which is one of the reasons that I went with this one first, because the chapters are very short. They're like, 3 and 4 pages. So I read through the 3-page chapter. And then a little bit later, actually, I think it was that was before work. And then when I got home from work that same day, I read through the chapter again. And that was all I did that first day doing that. And then the following day, maybe a couple days later, I can't remember which, I sat down and I read through the chapter again. And then I read through the chapter a 4th time, started to read through the chapter a 4th time, but this time I was looking up the words that I still didn't understand, the phrases that I didn't understand. I try to avoid doing individual words just as I'm going, because the only time that I will do words is when I look up a whole phrase. And so I translate the phrase and I write down the translation, and there are words that come up in that translation that I'm like, I want to know which word was which, and and things like that. I'm like, okay, this word was that, because I also am weird and I like to see how the words change, or how the translation changes based on the original meaning of the word in Spanish. So that's kind of how I like to do that. But I will go, so I'm actually still in the process of going through the first chapter of James y el Médico Don Gigante, and and writing down all of the ones that I didn't understand and translating the phrases that I didn't understand. I've only gotten like 2 paragraphs into it because it is a long process, but doing it this way kind of allows me to get the best of both extensive and intensive reading. I'm getting the extensive, so I'm getting the enjoyment that I get out of just straight reading through a chapter, even if I don't understand everything. Because let's be real, do you understand everything that you read on a page in your native language? I would doubt it. There's going to be at least 1 or 2 words that you don't know. So that's kind of how I look at it. But just to be able to sit down and read through that, and even make a little bit of sense out of it, and then to read it again and again, however many times, like the first chapter of Ollie Richard's short stories, the first chapter of the first story, I read through that 9 times before I even bothered looking up any words, or looking at the glossary that he had in there. 9 times. And then I went back and started looking up words. Like in this case, 3 times, and then I started going and looking at the words. That's how I'm doing it. So I'm doing both. I'm doing extensive and I'm doing intensive. As my base in the language gets stronger and stronger, and as my vocabulary gets bigger and bigger, the vocabulary that I can understand, not necessarily produce, then I will be able to read more and more different things. That's when I'll move up to things, like Harry Potter, which is a little bit more difficult than Roald Dahl. And then I'll move on to things like, I have a book called La Última Cruzada del Papa, The Last Crusade of the Pope, which is an adult book, and Paganismo, which is also an adult book. So eventually I'll work my way up to those using this. That's kind of my intention. So I hope that kind of clarified just exactly how I'm going about doing this. I just kind of wanted to showcase the differences in the 2 styles, and then showcase kind of the hybrid style that I'm doing. I actually first heard about this hybrid style, or a version of this hybrid style from Robin McPherson, and watching his video was kind of the one that inspired me to do that, and to kind of make it my own a little bit. I do mostly what he does, just with a few tweaks. So that is it for me for today. So thank you all for joining me, and I hope that you all are still having a great time on your own language learning journeys. Let me know in the comments below how your language learning journey is going, and maybe let me know how you're going about doing it. But anyways, thank you all for joining me, and I will see you all next time.